Hello, and welcome to Aptify with Christopher Hunter. This episode is for my developer friends, and we're going to be going over my suggested baseline setup for your code repository. Now, this is just my suggestion, so take what you will from it. Of course, always create your repositories that meet the best needs for your team and your organization. Now, before we jump into the repository, I want to talk very quickly about the actual repository service you're going to use. There's two primary ones out there. There's Git and SVN. I'm always going to recommend Git. I've used both of them, and I just like Git the best. That was after a bit of a learning curve. There is a learning curve to Git, but once you get over that little hurdle, it's great. What I highly recommend if you do go with Git is you jump over to guides.github.com/introduction/flow. This is GitHub's flow. I really like their flow. And what I've done myself and with Perbyte and some other organizations is read this over, go through it, and then morph it to meet the needs of your team. This is going to get into like hot fixes and all the little branching and all that, which might not fully apply to how your standard workflow does, but this is a great workflow. I love their setup and highly recommend it. Take the time, read it over, and then just tweak it as needed. Now, as well with Git, you've got, I'm going to say, three primary online offerings. There are a bunch more, but these are the three I would say if you're going to look at them, look at these three and nothing else. You've got GitHub, you've got Azure DevOps, and you got Bitbucket. Now, I'm going to get this out of the way right now. I'm not a Atlassian fan. I'm not a Jira fan and all that. So Bitbucket for me is hard to recommend, but if you are on Jira, I highly recommend you take a serious look at Bitbucket. It's got some really good integrations between the services. And why bring in a different service that's not part of the ecosystem when you can have a great service within the ecosystem? So if you're on Jira, highly recommend Bitbucket. If you're not, GitHub or Azure DevOps, honestly, it does not matter which one you go with. Sit down, do the review of their features, and pick which other feature set works best for your organization, your team. Probably the main considerations to look at: Azure DevOps is essentially free. It's pretty much, it is free, but your Windows account. We've all got Office licenses, so it's just there. GitHub, you can get away with the free licensing, but their team licensing, which gives you all the bells and whistles, is only $4 a user a month. So that's pennies. So whichever one you choose one of those three. Go with one of the big online services. Don't host it locally and all that. Your security will never be as good as theirs. The service will never be as good as theirs. It's just a headache you don't want. Don't do it locally. Use one of the online services. And that's where I'm going to end that, because there's probably a whole bunch of other controversy between all that fun stuff. But choose one of those three and we'll be good. Now, let's jump into the actual repository. So I've got VS Code open up here. I don't actually work in VS Code a lot for Aptify development, but it's way prettier than Windows Explorer, and I can show off my README files. Now, a little bit about the repo I'm going to be showing. You guys are going to see this a lot throughout my development videos and that. This repo is for what I'm calling Anime Manga Fans Association. I'm a huge anime fan. I watch more anime than any single human should, but huge fan. And this is going to be my fictitious sort of demo organization that I've got all sorts of fun things planned out. And as I build stuff for that, they're essentially going to drive probably most of the developer videos coming out. So this is the Anime Fans Association code repo. There are a few things already pre-built in here at time of recording, so we'll see how it goes. So Your main root folder. This is all done in Git, remember. So you've got the Git Ignore, and Git Ignore just tells Git which file types and all that to ignore. I like using the stock Visual Studio's Git Ignore that GitHub has built. So when you go to GitHub and you do new repository, you can choose a default Git Ignore. I use the Visual Studio's one, and then I haven't customized it yet, but when we get into front-end frameworks like Vue.js, React.js, you can just tack those Git Ignores onto it. But really good, solid Git Ignore to start with, and you can customize it from there. As well, within your baseline, I've got a lib and a source folder. So lib is going to be all your libraries or third-party services and clients and libraries and all that fun stuff. So right now, I've just got Aptify in here. One thing I would highly recommend is with stuff like Aptify, Sitefinity, or any of these services, you might be getting their libraries that are larger applications that are going to have versioning upgrades and all that. I would recommend keeping an individual folder for each version. As of right now, this is a brand new repo with Aptify, the 6.3. DLL's all in it. If this had been my repo, say from 5.5, I would expect to see 5.5, 5.5.1, 5.5.2, 5.5.3, 5.5.4, so on and so forth. Of course, after a while, you can clean up and archive those ones. But I would recommend doing it this way. That way you've got, if you ever need to go back and compare, you've got those licenses there. I would also highly recommend doing that for the Sitefinity ones if you are running Sitefinity. Okay, so that's libs. Pretty straightforward. It's just where all your libraries live. The fun one, of course, is the source folder, because this is where all our code goes, and we like code. So the way I've got it structured here is kind of the 5 absolutes or roots that envelop Aptify development. First folder up is Aptify scripts. So think of anything in Aptify that uses the script component. So this is things like VB script, SQL scripts, DB objects, HTML from, say, your message templates, any of that sort of stuff that's entered as metadata somewhere into a record. This is not fundamentally required because it is metadata within Aptify. DB objects, do you really want to pull those out of Aptify and keep them in a code repository library? That one's up to you. Same with like rule scripts on process flows. To each their own. I'll leave it that to you. The one I do like is message templates. So anywhere you're doing HTML templating in Aptify, it's just way nicer to write HTML in a proper HTML editor than trying to do it within Aptify. Yes, the Aptify web one is greatly improved, but it still doesn't beat out Visual Studio's or VS Code for writing it that way. So that's what the scripts folder's for. It's just kind of for that miscellaneous metadata in general that goes into Aptify that you may want to keep sort of outside. Oh, one of the other ones, as we move into Aptify web more, your JavaScript layout controls. Because they're just a JS file, instead of actually being an actual file you put into Aptify, they are just metadata on the UI parts. So another great place to store there is Aptify scripts, or you can create your own folder for that one. Second one, .NET components. I'm pretty sure you can guess what all this is. This is everything that is a C# or VB project that you're going to compile and put into Aptify. And we'll dive into that guy a little bit more in just a minute. We've then got the reports folder. This is for Crystal or SSRS reports you're doing. The two other ones are the ones you're probably like, eh. So web components. And what I mean by web components, they're all non.NET compiled components for your website or your web applications. So what I'm talking about here is JavaScript components, Vue.js components, React components, Angular components, however you pronounce that one. Any of those kind of components that are web-based, but they're not built on .NET. Websites, this is going to be the folder where you put the base folders for your actual websites and web applications. So e-business would be an example here. If you've got a separate site for your public site and e-business, they're actually two separate sites. You would have an individual folder in here for each one, or each application, so on and so forth. So that's your big website folder. So let's jump back into the .NET components. And I'm not going to show you the README file because that has my actual versioning policy in it, which is going to be in another video. So make sure you hit that subscribe button because that one should be coming out in the next little bit. So the way I have broken out my .NET components is more based on where you need to put the assembly, and to try and make it put the assembly in as few places as possible, because managing assemblies with Aptify sucks, but it's Windows and you need that assembly file. So what I've got here is we've got everything starts with our org's acronym, .aptify, essentially .purpose. So we've got .desktop. This would be only things that pertain to the desktop application, mostly just layout controls and action wizards, if you've still got any lying around, and form components for the desktop application. After that, we've got eBiz Classic, eBiz SOA. What I mean by eBusiness SOA is eBusiness 6. I'm not using the actual term eBusiness 6, as 6 will eventually become 7. But what it actually eBusiness 6 is, it's just the lightweight SOA. So what I've got in here is eBusiness 6 or ebusiness.soa.amfa. That is because your SOAs, whether it's the root Aptify Web SOA or the eBusiness SOA, you really should have an SOA per application or security group, whichever you'd like to do it. So this one, we've got one primary website. So we got one there. Aptify.shared. So the shared one this is your global one. The things that are in shared apply to all applications across the Aptify stack. So process flow components are a perfect example of what would go into here. Helper methods and utilities like that. Then we've also got SOA.html5. This would be for any overrides or customizations of Aptify Web, Aptify Web's SOA. I should point that out because it's the SOA side. Any overrides to the actual Aptify Web front-end client, UI client, that would go actually in the websites folder or web components folder because those are not .NET compiled. And then we've got Aptify Web SOA shared. This would be very specific stuff that are shared across the SOA layer. These could be specific controllers. If you've got maybe a unique controller for how you pull a certain data source or data type out of Aptify, If you've got, if you're extending the actual services layer in sort of any way, that's what the shared one would be for. And then I've got those all prettily tied up into one solution file. I would also recommend, just for your use, because solution files you can have a billion of them. Feel free to also make application specific base ones. That way you're not always opening up the all. You can speed up development and all that a little bit. And then, so right now I've got in here, amfa.com, which is going to be a Nuxt Vue.js based website tied in with Storyblock CMS. So stay tuned. I'm going to have some more stuff about that. And that's all that's in websites. I don't really have any web components yet. We'll see what goes on there. So that's my sort of baseline layout for my repo. Hope it all makes sense. It makes sense in my head. This is from my time of recording, 14 plus years of developing Aptify, and this is kind of makes the most sense and should be the least impactful on getting stuff deployed easily. And that's it for this episode. Hit that subscribe button, thumbs up, thumbs down, all that YouTube fun stuff. Head over to Aptify to connect to continue the conversation, and we'll talk to you next time.